Welcome to another episode of the Ascetus podcast. Today we're continuing our series on Slavoj Zizek's Sublime Object of Ideology with JuiceMoney. Welcome to the show, Juice.
Thanks, FullMetal. Let's do this.
Let's get into it. So last week we covered the preface and the intro. This week we're going to get into the meat and potatoes of the book. Basically how these podcasts are going to go is each episode is going to be a half of a chapter. So today we're going to do chapter 1, part 1. Next week you'll get chapter 1, part 2, and so on. We did just want to mention that the way we're structuring these podcasts, we are using some of the essays that have been written in the reading group we just finished on this book. So you're kind of getting the best of the best in terms of the analysis and you know, the kind of content that we're putting together in these reading groups. So if it is something that interests you, there's going to be a link in the bottom, and hopefully you could get in on the next one. Why don't we get into it here, Juice, if you want to walk the people here through some of these Lacanian concepts, because they are pretty key, pretty central to the ideas of this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to start with a chess analogy. So just like a regular wooden chessboard, let's get the squares, different color squares, black and white, two sides, you know, white pieces, black pieces, just regular chess, right? So the first thing we have is the real. Now Lacan's definition of the real, it changes and shifts over his lifetime and with his body of work. But for this book, we can describe it as the incomprehensible physical reality of chess that we can never really fully internalize due to our limited senses and conceptual apparatus. So that would, for example, be if you took the chessboard and looked at it under a microscope, you'd see the cells that make up the grain, and it probably looks like something foreign or alien. It's because that we can't really grasp that. That's the real, what that board is made out of, what the pieces are made out of. That's stuff that goes beyond our conception. The next concept we have is the imaginary. So the imaginary in our chess example would be the point values of the different pieces, the movement patterns that the different pieces can move. So, you know, the knight can move in an L shape, the bishop diagonally, the rook, you know, laterally, or, you know, up and down, left and right. And then the queen can go basically wherever she wants. So those different, I guess, aspects of the game is what the imaginary would be. And then their last term is the symbolic. That's more of a specific board state. I know there's different like openings in chess or different positions you can be in, but it's specific to the game, where the value and meaning of each piece is determined by its relation to the other pieces and the previous moves that created the board state. So the symbolic is at that moment in time, you know, the relationships between all the different pieces in the game. So let me give you an example, right? So the queen isn't always the best piece in the game, right? It depends on the state of the game and where the other pieces are located. And we'll get into this in a little bit, but, you know, a pawn can be the most important piece in a game, and a pawn can have aspirations to be a queen if it makes it all the way down the board. So, you know, it's that symbolic level of the chess game that we're describing here. So that's our three: the real, the imaginary, and symbolic.
That, you know, and thank you for going through that. I mean, I think that's a great analogy and a great way to look at it, that kind of takes this abstract concept and makes it a little bit easier to understand. Now that we have laid that groundwork, I think it's important we get into the section here. In this particular section that we're speaking of here, chapter 1, part 1, it's easy to miss that some of the positions being advocated for in the text are existing within a wider political and philosophical context, and that, if you think about it, they are contrarian and in nature. And what we mean by this, what is meant here, is that the positions basically are an orthodox Marxist position and an orthodox Freudian position. And we're going to get into how that's a direct challenge to the revisionist lines of liberal establishment and liberal thought. So first example here, we're going to start with a very clear and defined example. Zizek opens this chapter by examining Freud's dream form. Dreams can be broken down into three key levels: the manifest content, which is the literal structure of the dream; the latent content, which is the understanding of what and why something is occurring within the dream; and then the unconscious desire, which is the deep underlying drive of the dream that can't easily be understood through language. For example, picture a dream that a man is having where he is driving his family to a vacation home, to a holiday home. The car in front of him stops, but the father fails to react due to being distracted by his phone, and he ends up crashing the car. So what do we, how does this whole manifest latent unconscious thing apply to this dream? So the manifest content is what would have been displayed in the dream. So, he's in the car, he's with his family, he's in a particular location. The latent content would be that the father is distracted with work and he will fail his family quite violently in this case. But, maybe he's got the same dream frequently. And if that's the case, then the latent content of the dream is not the real thing driving that particular dream. Rather, that would be the hidden unconscious desire. So in a lot of ways, this is kind of tying back to what we spoke about last week, where we treat a symptom and not a cause in our society. And you could apply that to a multitude of different instances. But what Zizek is trying to lay down here is we're not just looking at the symptom and saying, okay, how do we treat the symptom? We're asking why that is even a symptom in the first place. And then, we take this framework and we apply it to various different things, various different analyses. It could be societal, it could be psychological, and so on and so forth. And this line of inquiry actually lets us get a little bit deeper than the surface level, let's call it the liberal labeling of a particular symptom, and then connecting it to its corresponding treatment, right? This is the kind of approach where we would be looking at the direct underlying cause. Why is this person even feeling this way in the first place? Why are you exhibiting the symptom? And let's take care of that rather than just band-aiding over the symptom and hoping you get better.
Yeah, absolutely. And those three parts of the dream that you discussed there, the manifest, the latent, the unconscious desire, line up with the real, the imaginary, and the symbolic. So the manifest content would be the real, right? What makes up the dream, where the car is, kind of the setting in a way. The manifest content would be the imaginary, and then the unconscious would be the symbolic, right? So it's important to remember, and we talked a little bit about it last week or last episode. So it's important to remember that the understanding of modern psychology today it does not align with Freud and Lacan and psychoanalysis because it stops at the imaginary. It doesn't take the symbolic into account. So the person that's really pushed this clinically is Melanie Klein. She has a book called Ego Psychology, and it is a subversion of the Freudian revolution. So, Freud talks about dreams a lot and the different parts of the dream, right? So they are basically the antithesis of Freud. Instead of digging into the unconscious or symbolic, Kleinians fixate on the latent or the imaginary. So it stops short of that getting to the cause or the root cause. They stop at the symptom, essentially.
So, I mean, it's a subversion in a sense. You could look at it as a subversion of that Freudian line of thinking.
Yes, absolutely. So they focus on the patient's relationship to concrete objects, so like in the imaginary, while Lacan's focus is more on the relationship to the symbolic order and language specifically, and that's the unconscious. So, and this really isn't an an abstract theoretical debate, though it may sound like it. It is very concrete on the nature of clinical practice. It has direct ramification on people's lives. So just to wrap this all up, just in three little points here. How is Klein different from Freud? One is object relations theory. So places less emphasis on biologically based drives and more important on consistent patterns of interpersonal relationships. So you can see how that kind of stops. It doesn't go to the symbolic. Two, it's more maternal, I would say, in a way. It really stresses the intimacy between the mother and the child. And then finally, this is an important part. The object relations theory, which is Klein, generally see human contact and relatedness, not sexual pleasure, as the prime motive of human behavior. So it sort of neglects instinct in a way. But yeah, that's where you'll see a lot of the thought today is Kleinian thought, and this book specifically is a refutation of that.
Definitely, I think too. The point you made with regards to this being a more maternal type of psychological process when it comes to the patient, I think that's a very good point, and I think we see a lot of that, right? You see a lot of that in the current. You see it in the general culture. You see it in schools in particular, right? I mean, there's clearly a time and a place for that kind of maternal nurturing and intimacy, but there's also has to be a place for that paternal aspect, right? It has to be balanced. If you have too much of one or the other, that's no good, right? And the problem that we're seeing a lot of the times is that because of this nurturing, this maternal, quite literally mothering and smothering, you have these people who are overly sensitive about literally everything, right? I mean, it's a fact of life that we're gonna go through life with some bumps and bruises, and not everything is hunky dory and gonna work out, right? You're gonna find people who don't like you, they don't like a multitude of things, right? They could just hate you from the outset, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do, right? You can't really live your life dependent on what these other people are thinking or doing about, with regards to you. It's actually quite funny that it's called object relations theory, because it really just demonstrates that whole liberal love of just slapping labels on things, which again, it kind of just shows the fetishistic nature of it, right? I mean, liberals just love buying, selling, giving, trading, receiving labels. I think the perfect example of this, which I have yet to see an actual Latino person or anyone who's Hispanic call themselves Latinx. It literally seems to be exclusively used by white women for some reason, and no one who it's actually purporting to describe uses this term. So that's a perfect way to think about it. It's just a label. Nobody asked for it. Nobody wants it. And yet here we are.
I mean, absolutely. You go on Twitter and you'll see people collect labels in a way. I'm this and that and this, and these are my pronouns and all that. That's a perfect example. Latinx is one, right? Mm-hmm. And what's funny about Latinx is it's like grammatically incorrect in Spanish, right? So they have, masculine and feminine endings to words, O and A, but then they just say, no, screw language, we're going to do what we want, and put an X there. I don't know. I think it's funny how opposite and antithetical it is.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, it just goes on to show, right? We don't have to stick with the liberals on this one, right? I mean, if you just look at the whole kind of dialectic that we have going on, think of this as the opposing forces of the Ben Shapiro versus the Ocasio-Cortez dialectic, right? Again, it's something that's purely imaginary. Everybody just labels things, right? It's just a fetishist distraction on both ends. It's just they're labeling different things and assigning different symbolic values to these things. And rather than actually achieving anything, all we're doing and all that media does is just we're labeling and relabeling constantly. Is this conservative? Is this leftist? Is this socialist? Is this communist? Is this libertarian? Like, what's the, you know what I mean? And nothing actually ends up getting done. It's just this whole circle jerk of, well, you said this, but I said that, and da-da-da-da-da, and that doesn't get us anywhere.
Absolutely, because it just stops in that interpersonal relationship, that object relations theory level. It doesn't address the symbolic or the root issues that show a lot of these symptoms, right? And it's funny because the only thing that comes out of it is both sides just own each other, quote unquote, like own the libs or own the right or whatever. It's all just like a... what they call them clapbacks. Everyone's just trying to get that, zinger in.
Yeah, I mean, and then this gets extrapolated into, oh, cool, you got ratioed on Twitter. Look who got the most likes on this Reddit post or whatever, right? Like, oh, great. I'm so glad you were funny once in your life, and it's forever, in the museum of the internet now. But can we actually, I could, my family could barely afford to put food on the table or gas or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, let's get down to the actual brass tacks here. And the funny thing is too, right? It's something that is not strictly in the, the typically labeled political sphere, right? I mean, the manosphere, anyone who's listening to this is probably familiar with our Lord and Savior Rollo Tomassi, who is just such an absolute boomer that it's so ridiculous, right? I mean, all his whole everything is based on this whole hypergamy thing. Okay, we get it, bro. Like, women want the best possible mate, bro. Okay, cool. Wow, so such a revolutionary thought. I mean, if you think about it, this would literally be like you playing chess and constantly fixating on the queen because she's the best piece. That's clearly not how you win at chess. I mean, that's going to work if you're like 5 years old, but you can't just ignore the rest of the board. You can't ignore the structure of the game, right? And you actually have to move forward and use the other pieces and get a greater conception of what's going on rather than just focusing on one thing and saying it's the end all, it's the be all and end all.
Absolutely. And it just goes back is that you have to dig into that symbolic layer, because it really doesn't matter, what chess piece a person is, right? Or what chess piece a piece is. All that matters is how that chess piece is used. A person can be like a pawn, but they can be a very important pawn in a particular chess game. So what you have to establish is the board state. It's like looking at a halfway through a random chess match, right? You have to understand what's there, and what's missing is just as important as what's there, and then where everything is in relation to each other will tell you what pieces are in important positions, what pieces are, a threat to your opponent, what pieces are a threat to get destroyed themselves, whatever it may be, right? So you gotta see the relationship between the entire state of the game, and that's that symbolic layer.
Definitely, and it also sort of takes us to the next point where, in every ideology, and this is the tough part, especially with regards to the coronavirus stuff, right? We could see this sort of COVIDian ideology developing in real time, which is why this book is a very important read. You're going to reach an ideological asymptote where there's going to be a point where the ideology breaks down and basically contradicts itself. And the perfect way to look at it is if we look at the states, right? We're gonna, speaking to our American audience here, you take the U.S. Constitution, right? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. except for the slaves. Yeah, they don't really count, right? You make this category that is exempt, right? And then even now, right? Okay, we don't have slavery in the same sense, but now we have, we're purported to have all this freedom. Okay, well, your freedom is to sell your labor. Okay, well, yeah, you're free in one sense, but you're not in another, right? You're free to do this limited set of things. You're free to basically choose your master in that kind of master slave sort of dialectic.
Yeah, it's part of that ideology. It is that asymptote, that radical opposite almost. That's inherent to the ideology. It's very specific to the theory of ideology to begin with. But that inherent negation, or that inherent contradiction basically enables the system to run, right? Because without slavery, that was an exception to the rule. It allowed the entire colonial system to function. Now, that's not a moral imperative or good or bad there. It just was. That was the symbolic structure. So you can see how when you have that inherent contradiction, the ignorance or the naivety of the people following the ideology requires them not to be able to rationalize those two things. Like, they have to accept that, right? Because once they realize the inherent contradiction, stuff starts to kind of dissolve in a way. So that's really a key critical aspect of ideology, is that radical opposite.
Yeah, definitely. And I think here too, we this is something that I think gets ignored usually by liberals. It gets brushed away, where repressing these types of symptoms that are manifesting. Whereas if we look at it through this Marxist and Freudian critique, we look for these things. We look for these particular things because it's in these exceptions that we're able to kind of get into the next level, right? If we just accept things as they are and, okay, well, that's just how it is, I can't do everything. I gotta go to my 9 to 5, haha, right? If you just stop there, it's exactly the same as stopping at that imaginary level when we were talking about earlier about the psychological analysis, right? This is sort of the next step, right? We're moving forward. And, I think the other part that we're seeing here, and this is a phenomenon that I've personally been seeing, and I'm sure other people have been seeing it too, that we're kind of exhausting the existing neoliberal power structure. And what I mean by this is it's clearly off kilter. It's wobbling a little bit, right? And it's kind of starting to eat itself, right? There hasn't been an ideological adversary to reinvigorate and to energize liberalism, really, right? So the whole spinning top that is neoliberalism is beginning to wobble without any sort of inherent enemy. I mean, it's vaguely China, I guess. It's vaguely Russia, but everything is so interconnected anyways that what are you going to do about it? If your whole manufacturing base is in another country, okay, well, guess we can't bomb them. Guess we have to play these games, and it's basically this giant game of geopolitical chicken that we end up in. Yeah,
absolutely, man. It's such a good point. Hegel would be rolling in his grave right now, especially with the words of George Bush Sr. in his inauguration address. And I'm not going to be able to quote it specifically, but he essentially said, the debate is over. We've found the best form of government, and it's the United States capitalist republic. It's the capitalists have beaten the socialists, and will forever be the superior form of government, right? But that is totally naive because it discounts that one, having an ideological adversary is beneficial, right? So instead of finding that conflict internally, you can unite your ideology against an enemy. Okay, so and you're right that ideological adversary doesn't really exist. Now, Hegel is rolling in his grave because he would argue that you can never just be like, well, this is the best form of government, that it would constantly have to assert itself as that, and it would have to have that adversarial relationship to prove that. So we can't just say it is and then it will be. It's that whole dialectic, that relationship between having a negation and then negating that negation, saying that you have come out on top. So without that adversary, you're so right. It seems that especially with the COVID and the vaccine thing, it's they're trying to invent one in a way.
Yes, for sure.
And as that top wobbles, we see an increased what Zizek would call cynicism. So it's like cynicism, but with a K at the beginning. And that's defined as like the plebeian rejection of official culture by means of like irony and sarcasm, right? You can see that a lot now with COVID and the vaccines. Just on both sides, there's just a lot of the memes and sarcasm, and it's just both sides are rejecting each other's official culture, but that's the answer to ideology from the lower classes, is this cynicism. Now, where that differs from cynicism is the answer of the ruling culture to the cynical subversion. Okay, the cynicism takes it into account. It takes that particular interest behind the ideology, and the distance between the ideological mask and reality, but it still finds reason to wear the mask. So it goes back to, they know it, yet they still do, right? Where people are choosing to put on that mask. And it's quite literally, in some ways, currently, choosing to wear that mask instead of kind of breaking through and saying, yeah, this ideology doesn't make sense, or it doesn't. Yeah. It has that illogical aspect to it, that asymptote. So it's the reaction. It's a relationship between the two.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the States, particular, this is kind of easy to see, right? You kind of have this general stereotype that's certainly been amplified since the Trump era, but even more so now. You kind of have this blue collar rejection of, let's just call it Washington in general, the establishment. I think that's always been a bit more of a, call it Southern or Republican thing, or, people who would be colloquially referred to as rednecks, right? And then the cynicism would be your late night talk show hosts accounting for this and kind of making jokes about, the Midwest is there's nothing going on there, right. Like that kind of thing, right? Right. It's already discounting anyone's opinion that's not in the group, right? And it's very plain, especially if you look at the modern media climate. The thing that's interesting here too, though, is that people don't realize that when it comes to obeying a certain authority, right, that it is basically the people's choice. And what how Zizek talks about this is with regards to feudal fetishism. So for example, think about a king, right? We have a king, he's a ruler, and then the general thinking is, well, he's a king because he's the king, right? He's divine and divinely ordained to be the ruler, right? So you don't really question it. But in reality, the only reason that the king is because the people treat him like a king. So if everybody stopped treating him like a king, then he's just a guy. He's just a person. In capitalism, where this kind of gets, you know, sorry, I'm just going to stop there. In capitalism, where this differs is that everyone treats each other, rationally, but projects their belief onto objects. So the relation between the objects becomes fetishized, and hence we have a commodity fetishism type of thing. So you could look at this on either side, right? You have the diehard Trumpers, and then, I mean, I don't think there's any diehard Joe Biden fans, but at least symbolically they're you know, on Team Joe. You know, it's just that they're not even looking at the person anymore, right? Both sides have chosen their symbolic commodity, right? It's going to be the leadership style of a Trump versus the leadership style or lack thereof of a Biden, and then fetishizing that to the nth degree, right? I mean, both have clear and utter failings, right? And that's what these sides are missing, you know, when you're trying to speak to them or in any sort of discussion.
Yeah, and it's what we see ideology is developed, especially like totalitarian ideology, really no longer has the pretense of claiming to a truth or a lie that is being experienced as a truth. It's not supposed to be taken seriously, but it seems that in our current situation, the only thing people take seriously is their ideology. It becomes their life, right? On either side of things. So I think it's particularly dangerous, and just because that cynical distance really doesn't exist anymore in many ways. People don't even realize they're wearing the mask, right? They think they're following the experts or following science or you know, following, you know, whatever Trump is saying or whatever it may be, right?
Yeah.
That's the only thing they take seriously. Everything else, morals, values, it's thrown out the window. And I think it's a really good quote from Sublime Object. The cynicism is not a direct position of immorality. It is more like morality itself put in the service of immorality. The model of cynical wisdom is to conceive probity, integrity as a supreme form of dishonesty, and morals as a supreme form of profligacy. The truth as the most effective form of a lie, right? Yeah, I think that's good to leave us off with, and is a good commentary on our current situation.
Thank you for listening to us here at the Ascetus Podcast. The link to the Ascetus Telegram channel is below for those who want a steady stream of the material that inspires us to make these podcasts for you. If you'd like to go deeper on the topics discussed, you could click the link in the description below, and a member of the Ascetus team will get in touch with you about personalized, in-depth guidance about philosophy and fitness. We do our best to bring you the freshest content possible, and all we ask is that you like this video and share it with someone who would appreciate it. Until next time, Full Metal out.